Have you ever wondered why the FBI spent fortunes trying to destroy a preacher's morals while the whole world was cheering him on? What if I told you that Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream had a B-side so controversial and anti-capitalist that it would make any Silicon Valley billionaire shake with fear today?
That's right, folks, and it goes much deeper. The flaws in his private life were the fuel for a resilience you can't even imagine having. Stay with us until the end, because we're going to reveal how Dr. King's contradictions can be the master key for you to unlock your leadership and stop being just a spectator of your own story.
Man, if you think Martin's mindset was just peace and love, you're more lost than a blind man in a shootout. The guy had a resilience that bordered on masochism, keeping his focus while the FBI under Edgar Hoover tried to destroy his psyche with recordings of alleged extramarital flings. Imagine the self-awareness needed not to flip out when your own privacy is weaponized against your mission. He wasn't a plaster saint. He was a man with brutal discipline who had to deal with bouts of depression and the pressure of being the example for an entire nation. It's the kind of inner strength we don't see nowadays, where any Twitter critique sends the average influencer into a fetal position. If you want to get anywhere, you need to read the autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. and understand that his purpose was bigger than his own demons.
Right on, Daniel. And speaking of demons, we hit his spirituality, which wasn't just Sunday prayers, but real fuel for strategic creativity. He used optimism not as a blindfold, but as a psychological warfare tool against the status quo. And let's be real, keeping your head straight knowing you're the government's #1 target requires a level of inspiration most of us don't find even at the bottom of an extra strong cup of coffee. The debate here is hot. Is a leader's character defined by his life under the sheets or by what he delivers to humanity on stage? People would cancel King today for these controversies, while others say his genius lies exactly in being flawed yet unbeatable. What do you think? Should an icon's private life invalidate their public achievements? Comment below, because this is the kind of polemic that separates the adults from the kids in social debate.
And speaking of social debate, King was the king of persuasion. But behind that flawless oratory was a guy who started questioning if capitalism as it stood wasn't just another form of modern slavery. He didn't just want a seat on the bus, he started talking about wealth redistribution and jobs for all, making brands like Apple look like rookies in the Think Different department. He realized that freedom without money in your pocket is just a bad joke, something he deeply explored in his final campaign, the Poor People's Campaign. If you want to understand this mental shift from civil rights to economic justice, you need to visit the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. That's where you see that his millionaire mindset wasn't about hoarding paper, but about multiplying the independence of an entire people.
Exactly, and that transition is a plot twist that school books usually skip over to avoid scaring the system. He went from nice preacher to radical threat the moment he touched the wound of finance and structural inequality. His transformation was complete. He understood that true victory isn't just legal, but material, and that requires a level of courage most don't even have to ask their boss for a raise. He proved that personal growth only makes sense if you're able to leverage others' lives too. If you're sitting there waiting for life to change without acting, know that King was planning an occupation march on Washington to demand real economic changes just before he was silenced.
And ultimately, the intrapersonal lesson here is, your mind is your castle, but the walls need to be concrete, not sand. His resilience came from accepting he was an imperfect man on a perfect mission. He wasn't a Lego robot, but a human, flesh, bone, and many contradictions who decided not to stop in the face of fear. If you feel small before your problems, remember he turned the fear of being assassinated into a source of power to boost a revolution. The next step is understanding how he translated this internal chaos into a leadership that made the whole world stop and listen. If you think leadership is just about bossing people around, Martin Luther King Jr. would laugh in your face. He was the master of active listening, but not that HR workshop kind, the kind that allowed him to understand a people's pain and a government's resistance. He used communication and persuasion to turn hate into a movement, making it hard for even his enemies to attack him publicly. Imagine the proactivity needed to organize the Montgomery bus boycott for 385 days. It wasn't luck, it was pure strategic negotiation and collaboration. He knew that to beat Coca-Cola, or any giant of the system, he needed alliances, even with those he didn't fully agree with. It's the kind of tactical empathy missing today, understanding the opponent to disarm them with arguments, not screams.
Speaking of disarming Daniel, we have to talk about his leadership behind the scenes, which was pure controversy. While he preached unity on stage, things got heated in SCLC meetings. There were ego clashes, power struggles, and people wanting to be more radical than him. His leadership was tested daily by his ability to maintain collaboration among groups that wanted to kill each other. And here's a spicy debate. Do you prefer a peace and love leader who sits down to negotiate with the system, or someone like Malcolm X who kicks the door in and takes no nonsense? Gen Z loves a quick cancellation, but King played the long game of political persuasion. Which side do you take? Strategic diplomacy or direct confrontation? Drop it in the comments because I want to see the sparks fly.
And it wasn't just diplomacy with friends. King was a master at dealing with figures like President Lyndon B. Johnson. He used street pressure to force negotiation at the table. He understood that leadership requires knowing when to give a little to win a lot later. For those who want to learn about this human chess, the movie Selma is a practical lesson in how a leader uses communication to manipulate public perception in their favor. He didn't wait for things to happen. He created the moment through a collective empowerment that awakened the best, and sometimes the worst, in people. If you want to lead your team or even your family, you need to learn that the loudest voice isn't always the most convincing.
True, Daniel. And there's a detail. His persuasion even reached the pockets of the big corporations of the time. He knew the system only listens when the money stops flowing, which is why the encouragement of boycotts was so precise. He turned consumption into a political weapon, something brands like Nike try to replicate today in their social marketing campaigns. But he did it without an agency budget, just with the power of the word and example. His leadership enabled ordinary people to feel part of something giant, an enabling that transformed victims into protagonists of history. He didn't give orders, he gave permission for people to fight for their own dignity.
In the end, King's interpersonal style was about bridges, not walls, but bridges that could hold the weight of tank treads. He knew that active listening was his best defense against espionage and defamation. He heard what wasn't said and responded with a clarity that disarmed ignorance. If you want to improve your networking or your ability to influence people, start by stopping the talking and start observing how people react to your presence. King didn't walk into a room to be noticed, he walked in so that his cause was impossible to ignore. The next step is seeing how this communication beast sustained all this on a foundation of morals and ethics that would make many of today's saints shake in their boots. If you think having character means being perfect, you haven't understood anything about real life. Dr. King had a steel-like integrity when it came to social justice, but he was a man of flesh and bone, with flaws that would make any internet court today demand immediate cancellation. He preached the ethics of nonviolence while dealing with transparency, or the lack thereof, in his private life, being monitored 24/7 by a system that wanted to prove he was a moral fraud. But here's the secret. His responsibility to the purpose was greater than his fear of being exposed. He didn't pretend to be a saint. He acted as an architect of human morality, building a standard of justice that even he couldn't reach 100% of the time, but which served as a beacon for the entire world.
That's right, Daniel, and this is where we throw the debate to the audience. What defines a man's morals? Is it his public actions that change the course of history, or what he does behind closed doors? Gen Z loves to cancel for any slip in character, but King challenges us to look at integrity as a commitment to collective truth, even when individual truth is messy. He had the responsibility of carrying the burden of an entire race, and that requires an ethics that goes far beyond being a nice guy. For those who want to dive into this dilemma, the book Bearing the Cross shows exactly that weight. So folks, do you think an icon's private life should be separated from their legacy of justice? Or must character be immaculate in all sectors to have value? Leave it in the comments.
Speaking of justice, King had a vision of ethics that clashed head-on with unjust laws. He said we have a moral responsibility to disobey laws that degrade the human personality. This is the kind of courage that would make compliance directors at companies like Google or Facebook break into a cold sweat today. He didn't seek cheap transparency to please followers. He sought the truth that sets you free. If you want to apply this to your life, start questioning which rules of your daily life are pruning your integrity just so you can be accepted by the group. His morals were based on the self-awareness that progress requires sacrifice, and sometimes the greatest sacrifice is your own reputation in the name of something bigger.
Exactly. He used transparency about his people's suffering to expose the lack of character in a segregationist system. He turned morality into a tool for political pressure, showing that justice isn't a favor but an inherent right. And let's be controversial. Nowadays, many people use sustainability and ESG in multinational companies just as a facade, while King lived in ethics of real results, where transparency was measured in blood and sweat on the streets. He teaches us that character is tested in the fire, not in the air conditioning. If you want to have a real impact, you need to decide if your commitment to justice is for convenience or conviction.
In the end, Dr. King's morals were constant exercise in overcoming. He knew the burden of responsibility was heavy, but the lack of integrity would be the end of his mission. He left us a legacy where ethics is not a destination, but a compass pointing towards equality, even when the path is full of mud and betrayal. He proved that a man with character can be knocked down, but the values he plants are indestructible. The next step is understanding how this moral compass led him to reap results that changed the face of the planet and created a legacy you are consuming right now in this video. If you measure success only by digits in your bank account, King would give you a lesson in historical productivity. The guy didn't have a software empire, but the prosperity he generated was the breaking of barriers that prevented millions of people from even entering the labor market. He understood that true recognition doesn't come from awards, though he won the Nobel Peace Prize, but from the ability to make your vision inevitable. He used social leverage to move legislative mountains, proving that a man with purpose is more productive than an entire factory operating on autopilot. If you want to be relevant, stop focusing on immediate gain and start thinking about the sustainability of your influence 100 years from now.
Speaking of influence, Daniel, his legacy is the greatest success case that ever existed. But let's be sharp. Nowadays, many companies use King's image in January to fake social responsibility, while in practice, wage justice is nowhere to be found. King didn't want to be a poster on the wall, he wanted tangible results. And here's the controversy. Do you think his success was complete? Or does the fact that we're still discussing the same things prove he failed to change the real structure? Gen Z demands total transparency, but are we ready for the discipline he required to maintain this progress? Leave your opinion. Did his dream become reality, or just a corporate marketing strategy to sell sneakers and t-shirts?
The thing is, King's productivity was based on metrics of freedom, not consumption. He knew that financial independence without civil rights was an illusion, and vice versa. He was a master at generating an increase in awareness, which is the basis for any sustainable growth. For those who want to see this in practice, it's worth visiting the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park in Atlanta. You see that his results weren't luck, they were the fruit of a negotiation strategy that would leave the Tesla board speechless. He didn't just deliver speeches, he delivered changes to the Constitution.
Exactly. And he thought about the sustainability of the movement beyond his own life. He knew that world recognition was a double-edged sword, but he used it to give a voice to the voiceless. Today, we live in the era of multiplying likes, but King sought the multiplication of rights. He teaches us that a leader's true income is measured by the number of people he freed from mediocrity. If you're only worried about your personal branding and not the impact you leave on your community, you're not seeking success, you're just seeking attention.
In the end, Dr. King's results are the ultimate example that character and focus can indeed change the world. He didn't leave billionaire inheritances in cash, but he left an inexhaustible source of inspiration and empowerment tools that we still use today to fight any kind of oppression. He proved that real victory isn't the end of the fight, but the creation of a solid foundation where others can continue building. If you want a real legacy, start planting trees under whose shade you will never sit. That's the secret to success that Instagram coaches don't tell you. So, after all that, are you still going to keep thinking your dream will fall from the sky while you binge-watch shows? The moral of King's story is clear. Character isn't about being perfect. It's about having the courage to be integral even when the whole world is recording your mistakes. He didn't wait for permission to change the world. He used his resilience and focus to force reality to bend to his will.
The question left for you today is, how are your leadership and self-awareness doing? Have you been the author of your life or just a spectator complaining in the comments? Stop procrastinating your evolution. Comment below, from which city are you watching this video, so we can know how far Dr. King's voice is reaching today.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next profile might be what you need to finally wake up. And if you want to materialize this mindset, the link to buy your Lego and other exclusive products is in the first pinned comment.